Greetings, Catholics. Thanks for tuning in to our conversation about the scriptures for the seventh and final Sunday of Ordinary Time. So the last one?
Right.
So we've got our candle. We
got our picture.
Really nice cat. Who's this picture of?
That's Jesus and Mary.
Jesus and yep, very Catholic. But yeah, we're going to continue our conversation. It's some more of the Sermon on the Mount gospel for the week, Matthew 5. And as I'm reading this, I think this is probably the origin of some really familiar phrases like eye for an eye, going the extra mile, stuff like that. Is this
very familiar and misunderstood phrases, I think.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll understand them.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll understand them better.
Okay.
By the end today. But let's start with an eye for an eye. Jesus says, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, turn the other cheek." That's another one that everybody's heard. But this is where it's from. So what is Jesus saying? Are we really not supposed to fight back when somebody is? Okay. What is it? Are we just supposed to let ourselves get?
There's a lot there,
beat up?
And also too, I think that his audience would have understood him. We find it weird with the things he's saying. They would have understood him. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth was a good thing in those days because it was a way of preventing this escalation of violence that was so common in their day. We think we live in a violent world. They really lived in a very, very violent world. But also too, their world was one of occupation by the Romans. It also was a world where, and I just looked this up just the other day, and I mentioned it in my homily, in a major city in the ancient world, 2/3 of the population were slaves. Wow. So slavery was a huge economic part of the world, and to keep these slaves oppressed and in their place was a constant all the time. So let's talk about, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that was a good thing, but Jesus is taking us something further. Whenever he says, turn the other cheek, when someone slaps you in the right cheek, turn the other cheek, he's talking to people who were like slaves. And this is all about a kind of nonviolence. So I think to understand this, Jesus is offering us a way of nonviolent protest against a system that is bad and is evil. And let's look at the first one. And by the way, Thomas Merton, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, these would be our great present day gurus of understanding this idea of nonviolence. Not pacifism, but nonviolence because you were protesting against. So if you were to slap an inferior, you would always, with the right hand, you'd backhand them like this. And this was a way of shaming them, putting them in your place. And if you turn the other cheek, you would then have to slap them with your open hand this way. This is the way an equal would slap another equal. And so the slave or the oppressed person would say, slap me as an equal, not as one of your slaves or someone you're trying to oppress or shame.
I see. So it's sort of like forcing them, it's as a slave, you're forcing your master to recognize your humanity.
Yes. And that's good. That's a good way to say it.
I stole that from Shane Claiborne, by the way.
That's good. I might edit and use that. You know, I might edit and use that. That's pretty good.
Cool. All right. How about going the extra mile?
Now, there was a law in Roman law that a soldier, and by the way, their equipment, their pack that they would carry, and the average Roman soldier was 60 pounds or more, given all the different stuff they would carry.
What was in it?
I don't know, but there's a lot of weapons.
60 pounds.
60 pounds. And I'm sure their swords or everything else they had were part of that weight. But they could force a commoner from whatever area they occupied to carry their pack for 1 mile. But they weren't allowed to ask them to do it any more than 1 mile. It was a law. So when Jesus says, go with them 2 miles, I want you to imagine this Roman soldier, I'll carry it another mile, begging this commoner to take his pack back, to take his equipment of war back, and sort of begging this person and as a way of protesting against even carrying it the 1 mile. It's a way of nonviolent protest against the whole law. If that makes sense.
Okay. So that's kind of different, though, than turning the other cheek. It's less about. Is it the same? I mean, like,
It'd be
is
similar.
it the goal?
It's a form of nonviolent protest.
Yeah, but as far as like forcing the other person to recognize the humanity of the person being oppressed.
Right. I think it's the same thing in that regard.
Okay.
That would be recognizing the humanity. I think that's a great way to put that.
Now we get to the big one, loving your enemies. Jesus says, it used to be love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
Again, they would have realized what he's saying by that. They would have considered all Jews their enemies. Excuse me, all Gentiles their enemies. All Jews would consider Gentiles their enemies, or the Roman occupation their enemies. They would consider them that. So Jesus' revolution, in a very revolutionary kind of a way, is saying you have to love them. You don't have to like them. They don't have to be your buddy. But you have to love them and care for them and their common humanity, like everybody else's. And that's what he's trying to say. And he's shutting down these borders that people have. Well, my enemy is all Jews, all Gentiles. My enemy is all Romans. Those barriers now are broken down by Jesus.
If you can manage to do it, if you can love your enemy, are they still your enemy? I mean,
well,
that's kind of what I. It's sort of an ironic thing to say love your enemy, because if you're successful in letting the love of Christ work through you to the point where you can show, like, then you're not really viewing them as your enemy anymore. You're viewing them as a human who you identify with and that kind of thing.
Right.
So,
I guess in one sense, they can still consider us or you their enemy, but we can't consider them that. I still think you're allowed to say they're the enemy. But in one sense, I have to love them in their common humanity. It seems to me, I could be wrong, it seems to me you still could say that, because I wonder if, for example, during the Second World War, we always considered the Germans to be our enemy, but still, in one sense, being called to love them. Or let's talk about the Middle East and terrorism. Do we have to love terrorists who would still claim to be our enemy? Do we have to love them? In one sense, we do. I always wonder what would happen if we started praying for terrorists by name in our intercessions during Mass. I wonder what people would say about that. Osama bin Laden.
Might be worth a try.
Yeah, to do that. I oftentimes wonder. And I wonder even in our own world, do some, I don't know this, do some Democrats consider Republicans their enemy? And vice versa.
That's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean, are they really our enemy? What are we doing? And do we need to love them too? And is that a way maybe of healing the divide in our country, and even in our church, in one sense, you have these political divisions of left and right, and I just wonder, what are we doing with all that? So Jesus is saying something pretty profound, I think.
Yeah. I think the intercessions, like you mentioned during Mass, that's a really practical way to demonstrate, to put this into practice.
And maybe this week we can include some of those. We'll see what happens.
Maybe that's something people need to look for or listen for at Mass this weekend. So Jesus wraps all this up by saying, be perfect, because your Heavenly Father is perfect. He shows mercy and love to everyone.
Right. As I think this is one of our cultural weaknesses. We think perfection is a moral perfection, or not just a moral perfection, but I don't make any mistakes. I don't fail at anything. I get it right, whatever it is, all the time. That's a cultural bias or understanding of the word perfection, which has nothing to do with the biblical understanding. Perfection here is perfection in loving. If we look at the sixth antithesis that we're in the middle of right now, perfection in loving, that I am not an angry person. I'm not a bitter person. I work hard on commitment in my life. I'm learning to love my enemies. I'm merciful. These are so if I look at the 6 antitheses and what Jesus is telling us to do, each and every one of those is an image of what the Father is like and what perfection would be for us. It's in loving, not in some kind of moral or human perfection that I don't make mistakes or fail.
One of the things I was going to ask you, based on the first reading from Leviticus, actually, where it says, "Be holy, because God is holy." Is holiness, or holiness and perfection?
I'd say yeah.
Really similar.
I think I would go.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
I mean, just based on the 2 readings, but
yeah. But then again, we have to think what holy is too, because we get the idea of holy. Again, it's kind of like this: squeaky clean, and I don't make mistakes, or I always have it together.
Yeah.
I don't think that means any of that stuff.
It's still really abstract. So it's
holy. I think we're going to be surprised when we die and find what holiness really is. We're going to find that people who have oftentimes maybe failed in life, as we understand success in life, but really are profoundly holy people. I think we're going to be surprised by it. And people we think are holy, maybe not all that holy after all.
Yeah.
Maybe life is just a little easier for them than for the other folks.
Well, we'll find out.
Yes, we
can't
will
wait to.
Looking forward to it. Yes.
Speaking of holiness, though, the Corinthians reading references holiness as well. Paul says that you, the brothers and sisters that he's writing to, he says, you are the temple of God. The temple of God is holy.
Yeah.
What does he mean by calling them the temple?
I think this is kind of huge. If you go back to the Old Testament, the temple was the temple Solomon built. And so they would say God dwelt in that temple. Many people of religion these days think the temple is over there in our church. And so God dwells in that temple, which I believe he does. But what Paul's talking about, more importantly in all this, is God dwells inside of us, the divine indwelling. And I would say that the point of all prayer is to come to that place deep inside of myself where God dwells, touch that place, have communion with God in that place of deep inside of myself. And that is the essence of prayer, to go there, that deep inside. Now, let me just say this. I think a lot of people, because of the hurts and wounds of life, have a hard time going down inside of there because of all the shame and guilt they might feel. And I think that's precisely the point of healing, where God wants to heal us of that shame, that guilt, that fear we might have deep inside, so we can get to the other side of all that. That's where we're going to find God, dwelling inside of us. And I think that's the essence of prayer and the essence of healing, as we talk about it so often in our prayer ministry, in the Unbound ministry. I think that's a lot of what healing means. In what Jesus did for people, he met them and he healed them. Sometimes that healing overflowed in their bodies, but I think almost always it was a healing of their spirit.
Yeah. Paul seems concerned about the temple, remaining intact. He's warning against people who destroy the temple. In that sense, what does he mean by if the people, if the brothers and sisters are the temple, how does one destroy?
I think sin destroys the temple.
Because it destroys the relationships, or what?
Yeah, it destroys the relationship. Yes. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. If the temple of God, which you are, is holy. So yeah, and I think he's also talking about scandal there, maybe. If I scandalize somebody else and I lead them in the wrong direction, beware. Because by leading people in the wrong direction, we're destroying God's temple, and he doesn't say very kind words there for that person.
Yeah. And like we've been talking about Corinthians for the last few weeks, but there's all this stuff about the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. I wonder if we try and tie it to the gospel today, does it sound, would you say that stuff like an eye for an eye, hating your enemies, only greeting your friends, are those examples of, is that the wisdom of the world?
Or yeah, absolutely, wisdom of the world, absolutely, yes. And then Jesus is calling us to something more. And I think the biggest thing we should be careful of is not dismissing these readings because they're hard, and they are hard. They are hard. We shouldn't dismiss it, but yeah, I think that would be correct.
So if we are following the wisdom of the world, in other words, if we ignore the way Jesus takes all these ideas to the next level, going the extra mile, loving our enemies, if we ignore all that, we as the temple of God will be destroyed. We'll be destroying each other if we,
we won't find God down there because it'll be overladen with all kind of other stuff that we won't be able to fight our way through. The Spirit, in a sense, gives us the ability to fight our way through the shame, the guilt, the incorrect way of living, to be able to get to the Spirit. It's almost like the Spirit's beginning, the Spirit's the work, and the Spirit's the goal.
Yeah.
And it's the Spirit of Jesus we're talking about here.
Yeah. So we've touched on a couple things that people can look forward to and be listening for at Mass this weekend. Is there anything else specifically that you want to make sure people are...
Well, just to ask one question. If much of the reading today was, the gospel was understandable to the people of their time, and what Jesus was trying to say to them, given their politics, given their situation, how can we understand these same readings given our politics, our situation, our relationships in the 21st century? We're not slaves for the most part, thanks be to God, and we're not in occupied territory. So how do we, and I think we have to use our imagination to be able to see how each of us individually fit these readings in our own life.
All right. So be prepared to use your imaginations this weekend.
Yes.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.